it kind of set itself up to be a sole agenda item tonight. So with that, Josh, take it away.
Thank you, Supervisor. So tonight, we're going to give a brief update on the status of 600 Ridge Road, the former Webster Furniture Strippers building, as well as 602 Ridge Road, the former Jade Palace, and 598 Ridge Road, which is directly west of the Furniture Stripper building. And then we'll entertain some Q&A and discussion with the board. So I was last here, I believe, in November of last year, as we were preparing to pursue the Restore New York grant application for our efforts to revitalize the West Webster hamlet. And a part of that was really seeking partners, potential development partners in the redevelopment and rehabilitation of the former Furniture Stripper building. So that entailed putting together a formal solicitation that we sent out to various developers in town. We did have some media coverage on the news. We did an interview on site with a couple of the news channels, and we also promoted this opportunity via the town's social media, website, and various email blasts to get it to as many folks as possible. So our initial effort back in October, we did receive some interest. However, no real viable project ended up coming to fruition as a part of that first effort. So in February of 2025, we kind of republicized the opportunity just to see if there were any other interested folks that may not have been aware of the opportunity. And unfortunately, overall, after both attempts, the response from the development community was underwhelming. As I mentioned, there were a few proposals that were presented to the town. However, none of them really fit the proposed vision that came out of the community-based planning effort that we did in 2023. And the condition of the building itself and the size of the parcel makes it a pretty difficult investment proposition from a development perspective. So again, I'll just refresh everyone's memory. The two properties that were part of our Restore New York grant application were 600 Ridge Road, the former Furniture Stripper building, and we, at the time of the application submittal in early December, we had not identified a viable redevelopment partner, so we kind of wrote the grant to be open-ended. It could be potentially used for demolition and abatement of the materials that are currently on the site, or we left the door open for the potential to partner with a redeveloper that would rehab the building. But for the demolition request as a part of our grant application was a $250,000 request pertaining to the demolition option. And then the second property, which is privately owned, the former Jade Palace at 602 Ridge Road, we requested approximately $700,000 to help with some of the building rehabilitation costs and abatement and some contingencies. So that property is currently on the market for sale, and it has been for quite some time. And we've fielded some inquiries from that listing. They've reached out to the town to kind of get a sense of what the vision is for the area, what potential uses the town would like to see here, and things of that nature. But unfortunately, any prospective buyer of that property has relayed to us that, there's too much uncertainty going on across the street in order for them to feel comfortable making an investment, which is understandable and makes sense. So we had anticipated hearing sometime in the month of April the results of our grant application, but unfortunately, as of even today, no award announcements have been made for that particular program. So the town has also been concurrently pursuing a different grant program to continue the environmental testing that we had started back in 2022. It's called the Targeted Brownfield Assessment Program, and it's actually through it's a federal program through the EPA. And it basically, the purpose is to help municipalities minimize uncertainty when dealing with properties that have contamination or could be considered brownfield sites. And the eligible activities for this program, conducting site assessments and sampling activities to identify the types and concentrations of contaminants. So if you recall, our initial environmental testing was inconclusive in some respects, in that the garage structure that was formerly behind the main building had been in the way of getting a triangulation and a picture of what's coming into and flowing off the site. So now that the garage has been demolished, we are able to get in there in that location and install a test monitoring well to finish up the testing that needs to take place. The average cost of an assessment like this does range between $50,000 and $100,000. So we have been in conversations for months with the folks associated with this program, and earlier, about 3 weeks ago, we were actually notified that our application for this program was successful, and that this program will be funding the additional testing that's needed. So we're very grateful for that. The third property we're here to discuss, again, this is 598 Ridge Road, which is directly to the west, directly next door to 600 Ridge Road. And in early September of last year, the West Webster Fire Department responded to a 911 call of a suspicious odor. And upon the fire department and our town fire marshal arriving on scene, several interior health and safety violations were identified, including but not limited to several electrical and fire hazards throughout the building, consisting of exposed wiring, open junction boxes, electrical wiring being fed through PVC piping, heating appliances that were not vented properly, and there was actually a 2x4 in the basement that was holding the floor joists up. So the town and the fire department worked with the occupants that were living in the building to find alternative housing, and the structure was ultimately deemed to be in an unsafe condition and was officially posted not to be occupied. We've made several attempts over the course of the past 7 or 8 months to make contact with the owner of the property. It's a probate situation where the owner of record is deceased, and it's in probate, and there's an heir that's been identified to the owner. We've made several attempts to reach them, and unfortunately, we have not been successful in getting any progress as of May 1st. But we are going to be continuing our efforts to rectify that situation. So the current status and next steps, given the results of our attempts to solicit the property for redevelopment and the lack of viable proposals, we are now pursuing to kind of quantify what it would take to demolish the structure. So we're proposing to solicit bids for demolition and try to identify some potential funding sources depending on where those bids come back at. And then we would look to schedule and execute the demolition. And once the main structure is gone, we would then move forward with the environmental testing via the targeted brownfield assistance grant that I spoke of. And I believe we do have a resolution on tonight's agenda for the town board to consider soliciting bids for demolition. In terms of 602 Ridge Road, as I mentioned, privately owned, currently listed for sale. We are still awaiting the results of the Restore New York grant that we have an opportunity to secure some funds that would make the redevelopment of that property more attractive from the developer community. As I mentioned, any of the interested prospective buyers have expressed hesitation to invest until the fate of 600 Ridge Road is known. And then in terms of 598 Ridge Road, we're going to continue our code enforcement efforts to resolve the immediate health and safety violations. And if we're unsuccessful in getting any traction with those efforts, there is a potential mechanism for the town to pursue emergency abatement of the conditions if the owner does not take prompt action. And that involves, there's a provision in town code that allows a public hearing of sorts to present evidence and then a mechanism for the town to move forward with either rectifying the conditions or potential condemnation of the property. So that is the crux of where we're at with our efforts for West Webster Hamlet revitalization efforts. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
I have a couple comments first, and I just want to thank you for everything you've done, and I know that we've sort of carried this ball forward after Matt Chatfield had really gotten the ball rolling. This is a property in town that has been on the minds of many. We've gotten constant questions over the years, and I'm really happy to see that it's not falling off the radar. While it's not happening as quickly as we'd like it to, these things never do. And I also think that that you've done a great job in keeping the people in town informed as to the process that's going on. So I appreciate these presentations at workshops. I can't wait to hear what happens with the Restore New York funding. I hope those results come out soon. I'm happy to see that we received some grant funding for the continued testing, the environmental testing. I think that was, did you say TBA?
Yes.
And I think it's important to note that we go after as much grant funding as we can, but we also work very diligently to determine which projects would be most likely to be successful in being awarded grants. Because we can write a grant for everything under the sun, but if you don't think you're really going to stand a shot at it, it's a lot of wasted time and energy when we could be putting that into things where we feel will be more successful. That being said, depending on the results of that testing, could we then be eligible for possible funding to remediate any brownfield conditions that might need to be met?
That's a very good question. So there is another program from the EPA that is designed to help with remediation activities. This one is specifically for testing, but there is a follow-on
Great.
grant to pursue if we do determine that there is remediation that needs to take place there. So, and it is, like most grants, once you've gotten the initial step and they see that you've made some progress, you're more likely to be funded in subsequent programs that relate to the earlier steps. So yes, there is a program at the federal level that we could pursue for a site. You know, typically, the grant programs like to focus on larger scale brownfield sites, but what was unique about this target, the TBA, is it's targeted and it's exclusive for smaller sites like this that don't necessarily fall into a larger brownfield area. But yes, there would be future grant opportunities for remediation.
Right, thank you.
Because I know, like, when you apply for a grant, sometimes, we have to be very creative to get it. And also, we try to get the projects and the towns, try to incorporate it together. So that this way, the vision would be more grant constraints. So, we can get the funding.
Exactly.
Jennifer?
You mentioned for 598 Ridge Road that the emergency abatement was to rectify or condemn. What rectify, I understand, condemn, what happens in the condemn situation?
Well, there's a process that is allowed under town code that we would essentially present evidence to the town board of the condition of the building. And if it was determined to be a public health and safety concern, the town could move forward with demolition of the structure and then placing the expense of that onto a lien attached to the property. That's one potential option.
So if that happens, the town can't, the parcel will exist with a lien on it, but that doesn't mean the town can take ownership of that property, or can the town take ownership of the property?
Yeah, I don't think we're proposing eminent domain and.
Kyle, this might be for you.
No, the town would not be taking ownership of the property. Under this provision, Josh was accurate. It would result in a lien being placed on the property, and eventually would go onto the taxes. If ultimate failure to pay taxes, that's a different foreclosure process. But no, the town would not be looking to take ownership under this provision.
I will say that, just the timeline on 598 that Josh showed today is very accurate. And if the town was playing hardball on the owners or the heirs of 598, September 1st is when they were cited with these health and safety things last year. It's May 1st. I think that is 8 months?
I think it's closer to 9.
Is that right?
Depending on when it was in
October,
September.
November, December, I'm counting on my fingers, and through April. 8 months, almost to the day. And if we followed to the letter of the law, we could have moved this along. We were talking in here before this town board workshop started about some successful properties here in Webster that we faced similar situations on, and we were able to reason with the owners and or their heirs, for lack of better terms, Kyle, to take your destiny in your own hands. Control your destiny. Fix the property or sell the property. Don't put the town in a position to have to feed you your destiny through government. We don't want to do that, and we've given them a lot of leeway, and we'll continue to give leeway, but we also have to do our job and make sure. So I thank you, Josh, for the way you presented 598. And Jennifer, thank you for asking the question of what could happen. We hope that it doesn't go down that road. And I will just say, and we have a hard stop so we can, I've been the supervisor for a little over 5 years, and this has dominated. This hamlet, this corner of Ridge and Gravel, and specifically 600 Ridge Road, the old furniture strippers, has absolutely dominated the time that I've been supervisor. I'm glad that Patty mentioned Matt Chatfield. That checked something off the box here. He was really one of the first driving forces and worked in tandem with Josh and with Charlie Genesi as we moved things forward back in 2020. In 2020 is when I first got introduced to just how tangled of a web of bureaucracy and how many government agencies had their fingers on that corner and on 600 Ridge. And we're really, to tell you the truth, it was going to be so messy to try to resolve it that I could understand some of the government agencies being like, we don't want any part of this, we don't want any part of this. And Patty, since you and I were the only board members at that time, because Jennifer and Jenny came subsequent, there was even a feel of some of our board members like, well, legally, we don't have any responsibility on 600 Ridge. And that was at a public meeting, a workshop back in 20. And I remember I said, well, I think we do. It's in our town. And if we allow 600 Ridge to continue to decay, which it had decayed since it had been abandoned circa 2007, this isn't a shock. I don't have to be a planner, Josh or Erica, who's in the crowd, to know if you let the linchpin center of a neighborhood rot, it'll start to rot going down 100 yards, 200 yards in each direction. That's exactly what's happened to the West Webster Hamlet. And so it's been a long road. Some of the highlights, we did obtain 600 Ridge Road. That was quite a process. We had to work with the county of Monroe because they literally had the direct legal title trail via tax foreclosure. They had elected for about 15 to 20 years, going back to 2007, to not take title through those tax foreclosures under an auspice of, well, if there's some unknown environmental issues, we'll just let the owner continue to hold it. Well, the owner had long ago abandoned it. So it was, permanent purgatory for this. The town pushed the county, and the county at least played ball with us. We went to the Supreme Court judge, actually it was Dan Doyle, and he gave us a 45-day where we could have the county's hired phase 2 environmental testing go in there. And I think that was at the end of 2022 and the beginning of 23, Josh?
Yeah.
And that was a milestone because at least the testing that was done at that time showed, and Josh and Mary Harrington, our previous town engineer, and Matt Chatfield presented to this town board in April of 2023 and to the community at the Spry Cafetorium that in more words or less, the legend of how bad this was at 600 Ridge Road was not that bad. And that was important to at least get it off to get that debunked. But there is some continued environmental testing that has to be done there, as Josh just said, and we are getting the funding through that EPA grant. I also want to say that I give Matt Chatfield a lot of credit, and I think Josh was involved in this. They pushed this town board back in 2022 to do a study. We hired a firm, they went door to door, because Matt Chatfield had an inclination that if we got this study done, that we would be able to prove that compared to the socioeconomic makeup of the whole town of Webster, that this West Webster hamlet was below that medium income. And if we could prove that we could use that study, Josh, for the next 5 years to apply for various grants. And that goes to what Ginny said about the creativity and the intelligence of how you go for grants. And that study we have put in every single grant application we have done in that area and on those buildings in the last 3 years. And we'll continue to be able to use that study, I think, for about 2 more years. Is that correct, Josh?
Yes.
And we're getting to my hard stop. 600 Ridge, I personally thought back in October the gig is up. We've demolished the garage, we've demolished the addition. Let's just keep going and demolish the main building. But we have tried to run a very collaborative, team-based government here and get input from our town department heads and other experts. And there was a feeling that there might be somebody from a historical society perspective that would come in and have a vision for what to do with the main structure, because I guess it was built in 1870.
Yeah.
So Bridget Harvey in our communications department, Josh, Matt Chatfield, when he was still here, I mean, we've flooded the airwaves trying to see, is there anybody out there that has a plan and also has the wherewithal, which is financial, and all of that. And I won't get into it, but we had some comical inquiries, from very good-hearted people, but they were not serious inquiries. So we exhausted that, and we exhausted that again in February, and we're done. And so now it is time to move on, and at the next meeting, which starts in a couple of minutes, there is a resolution on that board agenda for this town board to consider soliciting bids for the demolition of what is left at 600 Ridge. And if everything goes as planned, I think by the time we get into the June, Julys of this year, there will be nothing left at 600 Ridge. And that is just part of this long ordeal that is not going to be over in June or July, because we're waiting to see about Restore New York. There's so much more that has to be done there. I didn't even touch on the fact that we got a grant, did a study for the whole hamlet, including Empire Boulevard, and there are some zoning things in that they propose. This is a global effort to re-energize and redevelop that whole area. But I've said from the beginning, you're kidding yourself on all those efforts of redeveloping 100, 200, 300 yards in each direction from the corner of Ridge and Gravel if you do not take the snake off at the head, which is 600 Ridge. So
I don't want to say that
get off my soapbox, Patty.
I don't want to say that there'll be nothing at the corner. I think it'll be all opportunity.
Right. So, I think, unless Jennifer or Ginny or Patty or Kyle or Josh have anything else on the workshop, I think that concludes tonight's workshop. Thank you, and we'll be back in a few minutes to start the regular town board meeting. I went beyond my head.